Hey everyone, welcome to the Hey Hannah podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Maya Fields, but to my friends and those who know me well, I'm just Maya. I'm a higher education administrator, a mother, and a wife of 14 amazing years. But above all, I'm a Christ follower. This podcast is a special platform created to honor the memory of my beloved daughter, Hannah. It's here that I have the chance to have the conversations that I never got to have with her, to share the wisdom and love I wish I could have passed on. It's a reminder to cherish the precious moments we're given and a testament to the power of healing, hope, and personal growth. If you're someone who's seeking personal growth, inspiration, and practical advice to build a solid foundation for a successful and fulfilling life, this is the place for you. Join me as we honor Hannah's memory together. Laugh, cry, and learn. Get ready for a podcast that is so much more than you could ever imagine. The Hey Hannah podcast, healing hearts, one conversation at a time. Welcome back to another episode of the Hey Hannah podcast. So glad that you decided to listen and join in today because we are going to have a very informative and exciting conversation today with Jessica Pearson. Jessica, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to do so.
Yeah, hey Maya, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So as many of you know, I've been doing a series for Parent and Infant Loss Awareness Month, the Courage and Grace series. And part of that is we've been talking with individuals to share their stories with infant loss. And so obviously you all know that the podcast was born because of my personal experience with infant loss. So after, not long after Hannah passed, I joined some different groups, just looking for information. I ended up joining a surrogacy group. And so one of the things in there that was often brought up, and that's often kind of thrown out to individuals, especially when there's any type of battling infertility, IVF, child loss. I think people throw out a lot, well, just adopt. First of all, that's problematic, and we're going to talk about it today. But and I don't think people mean any harm. I think, they just really do not know what to say. So you're trying to offer some comfort to somebody really quickly. But we want to dive a little bit deeper into that. And so I joined some adoption groups after just to find out a little bit more information. And one of the first comments that I saw in the group was in order for adoption to take place, first, the child has to go through some form of trauma, which stopped me in my tracks because that's a completely different perspective than I'd ever known. Maybe like many of you, the narrative that I've heard and just kind of felt comforted with adoption is just everything's happy and everything's wonderful and you're going to adopt and, be the hero for some child, which is great. But there's other perspectives and other sides to adoption. And so that's why Jessica's here today. And I'm so excited that she is open enough and willing to be vulnerable and share her experience as a transracial adoptee. So I'm definitely excited to hear from her. Jessica, again, thank you for being here. And like I said, I mentioned to you about my very limited, which is kind of embarrassing, perspective of adoption. But is that something that you run into a lot with people's just thought process around adoption?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, painted as it's such a wonderful thing. You're saving a child's life. What could be negative about it, right?
Yeah.
And I was kind of given that narrative too, like, hey, you were chosen. We love you. Like, your parents were not able to raise you, and thank goodness we were here. And, I believed it for a really long time. And I still, to some degree, believe it. It's not, now that I see other sides to it, it doesn't take away the positive, but now I'm just seeing it more fully.
Absolutely. Can you just tell us a little bit about your adoption story, just kind of, where it started and just your overall experience?
Sure. I'm going to try to keep this short and sweet. Like, how much time do we have? So I was adopted as an infant, a day or two within being born. My biological mother was a teen mom. I was born in rural Montana in 1981. So it was, I think rural Montana in 1981 it might as well have been 1950, like the way that their perspectives on things. So, her family was Catholic and they didn't believe in an abortion, and they thought about raising me as their own in some capacity within the family. And I don't know why they chose not to. I wonder if it, probably would have brought some shame on their family for people to know that their daughter had gotten pregnant, or maybe they didn't have the resources. I'm not actually sure exactly why. So, and then the bio father at the time, my bio mom just wasn't, she was a teenager. She wasn't and so he was not even really on the papers, but I guess we did know his name because many years later I did look for them and I registered my name on adoption.com, where my then bio aunt, so my bio mom's sister, found me on this website and reached out. And she said, hey, are you Jessica of this year, in this place? She gave me all these details. And I just remember feeling kind of shocked. And I was like 23 when that happened. So it was right after college. And, we kind of instantly got in touch. And I was just thinking about this yesterday, how kind of traumatic that moment was, and reading this first letter from my bio mom and just all the words that she gave me. And I actually don't even have that letter because it just freaked me out so much. I think it was an email. I think I deleted it or something, and I wish that I had not, but it was just kind of this automatic response of and kind of shutting it down a little bit. And to this day, I'm 42 now. So that was almost 20 years ago. And we're still Facebook friends, but we, have not talked on the phone. We have not met in person. And then recently, which I'm okay with, I feel like we're both kind of it's a lot. And I think we're on the same page about maybe meeting would be a really that would be a lot of feelings. I don't know if either of us are quite prepared for, or may or may not ever be. And then I got pregnant in 2020 and I wanted to take a 23andMe because I knew that I did have I was told maybe I was half Mexican, maybe I was half Native American. I didn't really know. And I was always really curious about that.
Did you always have the, did you always think you were biracial?
So that's so interesting because one of my earliest memories, this is really random, but I remember registering for kindergarten with my mom. And I remember, they make you check a box, are you Caucasian? Are you Hispanic, Native American, African American? What are you? And I remember asking my mom and she said, just click Caucasian. And I feel like from that point forward, that's just kind of how I identified, even though, because they didn't really have any details and they didn't really know. And so it was you look white, just be white. It's fine.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I identified until I got to middle school and high school. So I grew up in Austin and, the school I went to had a lot of people of color, different people. And I remember the Hispanic girls trying to be real mean to me, wanting to beat me up. And I'd be like, I'm half Mexican. I'm one of you. Please don't hurt me. I would try to pull this card and it's so sad and awkward in hindsight, and so there was a part of me that just always felt drawn to it. And now I find myself pregnant and I'm thinking about my child and what I'm going to tell them and, what's their story going to be. So I was like, I'm going to do a 23andMe. I want to get to the bottom of, where does this great tan come from, and so I did it. And then funny enough, it actually came back 25% Native American, 25% Spanish. So even though it was all actually Mexican, but that was kind of the root of it. So I found that all fascinating. And I did click hey, look for relatives, just out of curiosity. So the bio father that my bio mom thought was the dad, ended up not being the dad. And so I had already connected with him a little bit. He and I didn't have a relationship, but he had a daughter. He had several kids, but there was one daughter. Her name was also Jessica. And she grew up knowing about me, thinking that I was her sister. thinking that there was some, and she had a pretty rough life with that dad and with various, her mom and various family members, and going through a lot of stuff, having parents in and out of jail, having, substance abuse issues. Like, she really went through it. And this whole time she knew about me and thought about me as like this big sister or something. And I didn't know about her. And so when she connected with me, it was so amazing. And I just thought, wow, like, you've really like overcome so many challenges. And I remember telling her, like, you should speak at schools because you're really inspirational. She's a very successful entrepreneur. And so it was a great connection. I remember asking her early on, like, would you want to do like a DNA test just to like check this out? And she kind of passed on it at the time. And that was fine. Anyway, so then when we do this test, I have to basically call her and tell her, like, hey, we're not actually sisters. And so that was a really tough conversation to have, especially because she had asked me, like, hey, I want to send you a baby gift. And I was like, before you send me a gift, like, I got to tell you something. And, so we hopped on the phone, we had this conversation, and she could not have been more gracious and amazing about it. She sent me a gift anyway. And, she's just an amazing human. But that was really tough too, just to kind of go through this, like, whoa, okay, so there's this other guy now. And I was not looking for a dad. Like, I have my adopted dad is my dad. And I don't really think too much about, that's not like a hole for me per se. So this guy shows up, he's married, he's got 2 kids that are in their 20s, and he finds out he has a kid that he never knew about. And like, I believe that it was a one-night stand. So I'm pretty sure that's what I've gathered from the details from the parents. But so he had no idea, and he really wanted to step in and like be this dad that he never got to be to me. And I had the experience of not wanting that.
Yeah.
And that's really tough for him. It's still not great because we're still kind of working on that, like finding what's a boundary that maybe we could both be good with. And we haven't really found that yet, because I don't really want that much to do with him and he wants everything to do with me. And that seems like a really unique experience I've seen, because a lot of adoptees really crave that connection with a bio parent. And to me, it just for whatever reason, it doesn't line up for me. It doesn't feel good in my body. So that's where I'm at right now. There's a lot. It seems like it's not just about me being adopted at birth. It's been kind of a lifelong experience, and it's still going.
I'm just curious, since your bio dad didn't know, so there's not like that upfront rejection factor that you're dealing with. Why do you not want to connect with him more, since he's wanting to initiate that and he found out about you now?
Yeah, I'm still exploring that, honestly, because my initial just like gut reaction, it's weird because logically, like, there, and this goes for everything and every trauma and every time we're in our head, right? There's like the logic that makes sense to us in our head, and then there's what we're actually experiencing in our body. So what I currently am experiencing in my body with him is a lot of anger.
Yeah.
And like, it's kind of like, gosh, like, who do you think you are just to show up 42 years later and act like my dad? You were not there. This is your fault. Why didn't you know about this? Why didn't you call this woman the next day? Like, you just, I'm not responsible for your mistakes or for the things that you've done, your decisions in your life. Why do I need to go through this pain? Why do I need to do this work?
I get it. I get it now.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense.
And so like, but logically, none of that makes sense to me. So like, even to say that makes me emotional, because I'm just like, oh, it's so crazy how we can be kind of misaligned with like what we want to believe and maybe what we do believe on some level, but also what we're experiencing on an emotional, spiritual level.
I completely, I get that. I can identify with that feeling, because this is the craziest thing. And it's probably my first time seeing it on here. I remember with Hannah, like, I was just thinking like, oh, maybe the funeral home's going to call and say like, we heard, it was a mistake. We heard like a faint cry. And logically, that's never going to happen. Jessica, now you made me cry. But, I can understand that because that makes zero sense. Like, I'm a well-educated individual. Like, my brain, I have all my faculties, like everything's functioning well. But I was really thinking, like, I wish there was, this stuff, and it might happen. There's a chance. So I get that. I completely get it. And it's just so weird, like how we can just, like, things just won't line up sometimes.
Yeah. And there's this other part too where I feel like he's really trying to make up for last time. Like he's like, come on our family camping trip. Like to me, it feels like it's a little much.
Yeah.
And so it just, and I understand it. People have been like, I don't know. What if you put yourself in his shoes? What if you had a kid that you didn't know about? Like, what would you do? And I'm like, probably all the things he's doing.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's like his journey and this is my journey. And I have to do what is authentic to me.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to as a lifetime people pleaser stemming probably from the trauma of adoption, I'm finally at this place where I'm like, I don't have to live for him. This is not my job to fix his mistakes or his feelings. And like, I really do have to stay true to what feels good to me. And I've asked, I've been trying to do this work on it of like, am I just afraid to feel the pain? Am I just afraid to go do this work to build this relationship? Is it just too painful? And like, maybe it is. And that's also okay. Like I'll know when I'm ready and he'll either be there or he won't, but I'm okay with that. And I feel at peace with that. So, and it's nothing that he can do, right? He's like, are you mad at me? Like, should we go to therapy? I'm like, I don't know if this is anything that like you can fix. Like there's literally nothing. It's not about you per se. Right. It's, and that's the hard part is I do know that he is taking it personally. He thinks like this is about him. He has said like, are you ashamed of our family? Are you ashamed that we're Hispanic? I'm like, actually, no, the opposite. Like I really want to connect with this like side of me. Like I'm into ancestral stuff. And like, I want to connect with this layer of myself, but also maybe not through you and not right now. And that's tough. I know. So.
Did you always know you were adopted? Did your parents tell you?
Yeah.
Or was it kind of like,
No, I'm so thankful that I knew because I'm also in these adoption Facebook groups and there's a lot of people that are not given that courtesy, I guess. I don't know if that's what you call it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember there was a book, probably, I remember being probably 2 or 3. And it was a book that explained like you have 2 mommies and 2 daddies. And there's the parents that made you and there's the parents that raised you. And we all love you, right? Like the we love you and, all the nice things were said to me. And I really did believe that for a long time. And like I said, I still do, but there's other stuff now that I'm also seeing.
Gotcha. Did your parents have any biological children as well?
So my mom, my adopted mom, had a daughter from her first marriage, and that sister is 12 years older than me. And part of the reason why my mom adopted is because she did have a series of miscarriages and she had an infant, really a toddler lost. She had a 2-year-old that passed away. And so she had been through a lot of her own loss and she always wanted a big family and she married my dad and, she would have adopted like 10 kids if he let her. But she got one, she got me. And yeah, so.
Did you ever feel like, and your parents seem like they like wonderful, awesome experience, like things were done as best, possible to make a great environment for you. But do you ever feel like you just, not that it was actually there, but did you feel like a difference between your mother's biological daughter and yourself? Like, even if she didn't necessarily do anything, did you feel like you were always on equal footing with her? Or?
I mean, it's tough because of the age difference.
Yeah.
But now after having a lifetime of experience with this family. I mean, yes, I do think that my adopted mom and that her biological daughter, my sister, have like a connection that I don't have with my mom. I don't necessarily think it's a super healthy connection. They seem a little like codependent to me.
I was just gonna say, because there's this book, Codependent No More.
Yeah, so they seem very codependent, and that's whatever. And they, my mom had her in her 20s. Like she went through a divorce with her. They were living in Canada. They came to the United States together. Like they've been through life together, and I'm not like mad or angry about that, about their connection per se, but I will say like I've also been exploring, especially since having my own kid, like the loss of having that biological mom connection. And it's like, I don't know, because I don't know. I haven't experienced it. And I think like maybe the parent to child love might be different, child to mother. Like, I don't know how you would compare those. Yeah. But I just know that I have such a strong connection to my own child, and this just like intense love. And my mom would always say like, I love you just as much as your sister. There is no difference whatsoever. Like, I mean, that was on repeat. And now I'm kind of like, if you had to say it, like, who are you trying to convince? Is it me or her? And like, I would have never thought about that, except for that she would say it to me. And then my parents got divorced. My dad got remarried, when I was 13, and that was tough. Like I was a angsty 13-year-old, and, I didn't want to like my stepmom or anything to do with that. Now I love my stepmom. She's probably one of my stronger mother characters in my life right now. Which is also hard to admit and hard to say out loud, because I don't want to like disrespect my other moms. But I know that she has her biological kids too. She's got 2 kids, and I see that connection, and I I know that she makes a lot of effort and that she loves me, but I know it's not the same, and that's okay. Like I love her for that, and I love my step siblings. So it just is what it is.
Do you feel like, I guess it just sounds like, you're having an expansion of the individuals who are around you serving as parental figures. So like just you automatically think like, oh, well, she has all this love. She has, bio mom, adopted mom, stepmom,
Yes.
Do you still feel like a sense of not fitting no matter what they do?
I mean, yeah, and it's tough. And this is actually something I just went through in the last 2 weeks was like my whole life of, yes, I should be grateful. Yeah. I am grateful. I have 3 mother figures in my life. I have, a father that loves me. I have this bio father that's trying to love me, and I won't let him. It's like I'm being bombarded with love. Why can't I be grateful? Why can't I just be okay with that? And I am. But what I've been working on is allowing myself to also feel whatever the opposite of that is. Yeah. The lack of gratitude. And like, even when I tried to step into this place where I'm like, it's okay to like not be grateful for the pain, to not be grateful for this, like, kind of place of loss. And every time I would try to step into that, my brain, the logic brain would be like, no, but you're supposed to be grateful. You should be grateful. It was like, it's such a strong voice of like, you should be grateful. Everything is about gratitude. If you can't be grateful for this, then you're just like evil, or you're a spoiled brat and you don't deserve love, or something along those lines, right? This is like where the connection goes. And it's like, wow, that's really intense. And so when I allowed myself to be like, you know what? I can be grateful, and let's just like put that in a room for a minute, and let me go into the ungrateful room for a minute, and let me just feel the pain. Let me feel angry. Let me feel lost. Let me just feel it.
Oh, man.
And as soon as I was able to go there and be like, it's okay to be ungrateful for some of this stuff, like I was like, duh, like you're human. Yeah. We're allowed to feel this range of emotions and this stuff that's like not, we don't have to hide from it, or we don't have to feel like bad people because we feel that way.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't mean that I don't love my family.
Yeah.
Because I think that's part of it too, is like, if I'm ungrateful, then I'm not grateful for them. And then that means I don't love them. And like, it's just all this stuff gets like crisscrossed. And I think we try to push away the negative emotion, right? We're like, I don't want to feel the pain. I don't want to feel angry. I don't want to feel sad. And so we're like, this happy story on this side is where I want to live. But I don't think that if we don't allow ourselves to feel whatever darkness or, negative stuff is there, I don't think that I'm actually feeling all that is good in its maximum capacity. It's like not to its fullest, not to its most expansive if I'm shoving away the negative. So I'm like, I want to feel it all. Like I want the full human experience of feeling the rage, the grief, etc. So that when I do feel gratitude and love, it is so true and big and authentic for me as well.
I get it. That completely makes sense. I am reading this book, and it's talking about like how we as individuals tend to try to get ourselves quickly in environments or areas where we're comfortable, we're happy, like there's peace, smooth sailing, and we're not really bumping into anything, but we're all living beings. So as long as we're living, we should be growing. Like that's what our experience is for and what we're supposed to be doing. And the author argues that in order to grow, you have to put yourself in uncomfortable, hard, disruptive situations, but we tend to want to shy away from those. And so like that's a part of growing into who you're actually here to be. It's like leaning into those uncomfortable, hard, like situations and feelings. And so it was just interesting to read his perspective on that. I've talked about that book a lot of times, but
what book is that?
It's called The Discipline of Disturbance.
Ooh,
I'm not sure about that. But
sounds good.
He opens the book with people don't really want to grow. And so I'm like, okay, well, here we go.
Yeah.
And that's why he said that, is because we tend to want to shy away from the hard things. I don't want to feel like this. I don't want to go through the dark, angry stuff. So yeah, it was interesting just hearing your perspective and like talking about, how that hopefully leads to some growth. Do you feel like, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I'm just agreeing with you. Yeah.
Do you feel like you have some type of meaning for your experience, or is that something that's important for you, like your experience has to mean something?
I mean, that's kind of what my gut has said all along. I don't know that I have a goal or a vision for exactly what that is. I've dabbled in some things. I was a CASA volunteer for a couple years because I felt called to be in the space for children that, needed representation. But one, I didn't have a kid. And two, I wasn't educated in all of these views on adoption back then. So, looking back, I'm like, gosh, I really didn't know as much. And I probably would be much more prepared to be in that role now. But that kind of took me in one direction, but that was really hard work for a volunteer position. And, it was right before the pandemic, and I don't know. I was like, I got to take a break from this. It's emotional, to talk to parents who are looking at possibly like, where their child could be taken away from them for whatever reason. And, that's pretty heavy stuff. But I remember being trained and thinking like, God, like, I want to build a foster home in our backyard and just like, I want to take care of all these kids because there's just so many kids in the system. And, I learned that side of the system, but now I'm seeing this whole other side of the system that I wasn't aware of before. So, it's really, really complex. And I don't know if my role is in that. I've just now been, learning more about adoptee voices, wanting to hear their stories, wanting to share my story, and just kind of like spread the word about like what I've learned to other people like in this capacity. But yeah, I don't know where it's going.
Gotcha. I asked that question because I know that was something big for me, and it's still kind of like a journey. But I was like, oh, this this is too horrible for it not to mean anything. Like, it has to mean something. It was just like, you know, you think it's like, oh, logically, or what some people do is just kind of like tuck it away. Don't ever talk about it again. Like, and I don't think about it. I don't talk about it, like it's going to go away. But I feel like and this is my personal experience, so everyone can feel, you know, how they want to about it. But I feel like it's so horrible that I have to have some meaning for it. Otherwise, I just don't know if I can cope with, you know, accepting what happened. And so I know that was something big for me. So I was just curious.
I mean, on some level, it's also cathartic and I think healing to be able to talk about your own struggles and pain. But I do think the meaning is being willing to be vulnerable and to share means that someone, hopefully somewhere, will hear it and not feel alone and know that, you know, their pain is not just their pain. Like there's millions of people that have been adopted. There's millions of people who have suffered infant loss. And, you know, I think maybe in our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, it was like, yeah, you don't talk about your struggles. You don't bother people with what's hurting you or what's hard. You just get through it. You just shut up and do it. And now we're like, wait a second. Like, this is really damaging to our mental health. And, you know, we actually are in a place where we can share. And that is, I think there's a lot of value in that.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. And even just like you said, seeing or hearing someone out there that connects to your experience is just so helpful, because I know for me, it gives you that motivation, like, well, if they can make it through, you know, I can too. But a part of that is people who are being bold enough and vulnerable enough, willing to step up and share, like, listen, life is hard, and let me tell you what happened, you know? So, and you know, biblically, it talks about, you know, the Bible talks about we'll overcome by the word of our testimony. And so in order to overcome, we have to be willing to share that testimony, which, you know, sometimes it's not pretty, but it is beneficial to someone else. You mentioned the voices of adoptees. Can you tell us just a little bit more about, because like I said, my perspective was always painted with like the person who adopts is the savior. Tell me a little bit more. And I know, like, you know, adoptees aren't a monolith, so you don't feel like,
I'm not going to speak for every adoptee I know, but just from the observations I've made from, you know, being in these groups and talking to other adoptees. I mean, I'm even in real life as a kid, I would meet a kid that was adopted, and like I could tell that their experience was not as good as mine. You know, like they were struggling with it. And I was like, that's interesting, because I don't feel like I'm struggling with it. And, you know, it never even came up for me. Like, I always thought I had like a solid head on my shoulders about it until I was like 30. And I started to have like, I don't know, I was having kind of like a mini early to midlife crisis where I wasn't sure what was going on. And I started going to therapy. And at the end of my first session, I was like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm adopted. And she was like, hold the phone. Like, she's like, it was like a record scratch, like silence, you know, and she was like, okay, like I need to share something with you. And when I told this on a different podcast, like the people were like, oh my gosh, the fact that you even found a therapist that recognized that adoption is trauma is huge, because a lot of therapists are not informed on that level. And so she explained to me like how, you know, the nervous system works and how your brain works and what trauma is and how trauma imprints in your nervous system and how this is how you move through the world.
Yeah.
And this is why maybe my attachment issues were not so great. And, you know, like I was all this behavioral stuff just was like, oh, this makes sense. So, but for so long, and even then I still was like, whatever, like, so I joined these groups, you know, and there's this book, I can't remember if it's called like Out of the Fog or Coming Out of the Fog or something. And I was like, I'm not in a fog. I don't know what you're talking about. But the fog is just kind of like that story of like, everything's fine. Adoption is great. Like, you're fine. Just be grateful. Go live your life. Don't look at the dark side. Right. And so coming out of the fog is basically like saying, hey, like, let's look at all of it. So the adoptee, perspective that I've learned very recently, is yes, like all adoption is trauma, which I don't disagree with. Some people will say something as extreme as all adoption is human trafficking.
I've seen that.
And some people believe that there's never a good reason to adopt. So what that would look like then would be, if you were taking care of a child that you did not give birth to, that it would look more like a guardianship and not an adoption. And to me, I haven't really like hashed out why that makes a big difference to some people, but they say it's because in a guardianship, you get to keep your own original birth certificate. I have my original birth certificate because I was raised at birth. So I don't really know all the ins and outs and details about what that does look like for someone who's maybe adopted a year, or later in life. Like, what does that mean for some people? I think some parents who adopt do want to like rename the child, make the child their own, and they're kind of erasing the original identity. So that can be problematic. There's a lot of discussion about just like, we need to be doing more for parents. So like, for example, my bio mom, there should have been more resources for her and her family so that they would have kept me. And like, maybe our whole culture would need to change so that there would be no shame that they would need to face. Right. So it's really like a huge cultural issue in some ways of like, why are we not supporting other people? And then there's also like, it's such an interesting controversy when it comes to like termination or abortion, because there's like, again, it's like a 50-50 where people are like, yeah, I would have rather have been terminated than go through this life that I went through.
Wow.
Or some people think it's like, yeah, if you don't want your kid, you should take care of it yourself. Like, so it's just interesting to me to see all of these different ideas of maybe like how to avoid adoption and what would be quote better or worse than, that. And it just seeing these, I really wanted to remain open to being like, wow, what are all these other perspectives? And what are some examples of the perspectives? And, learning that there are a lot of children that are like, quote unquote, stolen, from their bio families because maybe they weren't perceived as not good enough, but like they would have been fine. Yeah. And that is kind of where, like, when you think about CPS and kids in the system of like, it can be kind of a gray area. And there's a lot of racism, as far as like, who are the kids that get to stay with their parents and who are the ones that get taken away. And it's just, there's just a lot to unpack. Yeah. But there's a lot of, anger and frustration in the adoption community that adoption may not be the best answer for the child, the way that we perceive it as being that way. So, how do we navigate that in real life situations? I mean, it has to absolutely be a case by case basis because, I don't know, there are children that obviously need homes and need to be loved. And how do we navigate that in a way that's healthy and trauma informed and not just about being the savior?
Yeah. Ooh, a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
Solving
we don't have time, girl, to talk about it all. But it was just new to me to be like, oh yeah, like all adoption is child trafficking. All adoption is terrible. Like we should just banish adoption. And I thought, wow, that's like a very extreme view that I've never thought of or even explored. And I've just been, kind of thinking about that, mulling it over and attaching my own experience to that and wondering about that.
Yeah, for sure. What would you say to anyone who is considering adoption? What would you feel ability even before they go down there?
Yeah. There's a lot of talks about like what is ethical adoption. And I don't have like those bullet points in front of me, but from my own perspective, I would say, it's just, I think it would be important to also take into account the biological family's needs. Some people do say, like, if you really do desire to adopt, maybe you should just sponsor the other family and help them raise that kid, which I think is like, obviously that's not solving that family's desire to have their own child, but like, what is ethical? Like why there's that conversation of like, why do you think you deserve someone else's kid? And so I think just maybe reading books, going through that level of understanding and exploring. Some people think open adoption might be the route to go. I can see why people wouldn't want to do that depending on what the biological family is like. because, you know, you're inviting a whole other family to merge with you, not just a child. So I don't know, I would just say like, yeah, like listen to other adoptee stories probably would be the best place to start, just so that you can get this perspective of like, what is the whole picture? And then I would say, you know, it is a journey. You got to be prepared to know, like, what are you going to tell your kid? How are you going to raise them? How are you going to support them? Like, I think about, what if I was in therapy like earlier on, before 30, to know like, oh yeah, this is like some of the stuff I'm going through, you know, because my dad was a medical doctor. My adopted dad is a medical doctor. And I remember in 4th grade, my teacher thinking, oh, I think she has ADHD. It was really new at the time, but she was like, you should go get your child, you know, evaluated for this like learning disorder that we're learning about, you know, and I can't help but wonder and think back, like, what if my inattentiveness had nothing to do with the way that my brain worked and everything to do with like the trauma that I was trying to process and go through, but we didn't know. And I don't blame my adopted parents for any of that. Like, it was 80s parenting too. Like, we don't know what was going on, but you know, there's just a lot now that we do know. We know so much more now than we knew in the 80s and even the 90s and even the 2000s. So I would say, you know, just do your due diligence, listen to the stories. And like, you know, if you want to adopt, just know that like, yeah, your child has experienced a loss. It's not just your gain.
Yeah.
And how can you support a child who's experienced loss, not just at birth, but for their lifetime?
Absolutely. You know, I feel like it's so important, and it's always, I feel like the responsibility lies on the individual to educate themselves. Just educate yourself about the community, educate yourself about, you know, what's going on, and the best way to ideally let things unfold. I mean, you're not always going to get things right, but I think that responsibility is there to make sure you're definitely educating yourself about what's going on. We talked about, you know, it's a lot to unpack. There's, you know, so many, I'm sure, policies and reforms and things even that you touched on that we'd hope to see evolve and become better for adoption. But we start with that by making sure that we are aware of what's going on. So I'm glad that's why you came and shared your experience. You shared your story. Who, you know, we can't necessarily find the individuals to give input and ideally make some of the change that we want to see if they aren't aware of what's going on and feel their tug at their, you know, the tug in their heart to do the work that's required for a particular issue that they're drawn to. And there's just kind of a side note, but you know, people often say like, well, what's the point of protest? Like, they're out there protesting, that's not doing anything. It's just wasting time. You know why people protest? Because they bring attention to an issue. You didn't know what was going on until you saw that group of people loud yelling with some posters, and you figure out like, what are they talking about? The issue. That's why. So, you know, that's what it's for. And so when you tell your story, when I tell my story, we bring attention to the issues, and we get the individuals who are, you know, feel like, hey, this is on my heart to make a difference in that community. They start doing the work, and hopefully we see progress and things get better in the future. So, Jessica, thank you. Thank you for coming to tell
You're so welcome. I mean, I really enjoy talking about it and elevating voices of adoptees. I think it's important. And like you said, it's like a mini protest. I don't have to make a sign, but I can be on a podcast.
There you go. There you go. In the comfort of your home. Yes. So we end every episode with the same question. So I will ask you, what is one piece of advice or some encouragement that you would give to someone that you deeply care about?
Yeah. I mean, I think we all just want to be loved and accepted. And I think that we search for that outside of us through whatever experiences or things that can be. And so I'm usually telling people that I love, just remember your inherent worthiness and you are loved no matter what. And that none of that stuff will matter until you know that for yourself.
I love it. I love it. See, that's why you're a life coach.
Yeah.
Because you remind people of that. So quickly, I want to touch on that before we head out. You do life coaching. You're very easy to talk to, so I can see why this works great. What do you offer in life coaching for individuals, and how can they find out, about your different offerings and connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm a certified life coach. I have been practicing. Our business is Path Nutrition. So I actually started in the nutrition space, and I still am in the nutrition space, but it's changed from helping people with weight loss and giving them meal plans to doing the life coaching of it. Because what I learned was that, like what I said is, if you're finding yourself in a place in life where you're, you just know something's wrong, like you're unhappy, things are not going the way you want, especially women, we're like, oh, it's probably because I need to lose 20 to 30 pounds. And we're like, when I lose weight, then my life will be better. And it's like, ooh, girl, it's not. I mean, yeah, like maybe we actually feel physically better when we're taking care of ourselves and doing all those actions that would lead to weight loss. But we're not addressing the mental space of how am I talking to myself? What am I believing about my life and about the world around me? And how are those thoughts weighing me down? What are the emotions that I haven't explored that I probably need to go, lean into some of that negative side in order to fully feel the positive side? And like, there's just so much more to, to that. And so that's why I'm like, a diet's not going to solve your life's problems.
What is that? No,
yeah. I mean, if it did, we would have all just done it, gotten skinny, and been happy by now. So that's not working out for most of us. So that's kind of how I got into that space. So yeah, most people come to us for the weight loss or the nutrition piece of it, but it is so much more than that. And so I have expanded to where, yes, I want to work with adoptees, or I want to work with people who've experienced infant loss. Like you go through this big loss in your life. It is literally life-changing, altering stuff. And, maybe 5 years down the road, you find yourself like, where am I? What am I doing? What do I want to do? Am I allowed to experience this new life? Like I'm suffering from guilt and shame and all this stuff. And it's like, hey girl, let me help you. Like we can get through this. So it's not just weight loss and nutrition. It is truly life coaching, whatever it is, where maybe you've done some therapy stuff. So it's like, I think of life coaching as like, you're functioning, like you're online and you're just trying to level up.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that there's not overlap with things that feel like therapy, because we do talk a lot about feelings and we're processing some of those too. But I think of therapy, even though you can do therapy at any point in your life, like therapy to me is more when you're like in that immediate suffering and you need support to get to baseline.
For sure. Absolutely. What's the name of your business?
It's Path Nutrition. So you can find us at pathnutrition.com, or on Instagram, it's at path_nutrition. And I just got on TikTok. I succumbed.
Gotcha.
So I am Jessica Pearson on TikTok.
Okay, awesome. And of course, as usual, I will include that information in the notes. So if you don't have a pen, you can always just look in the comments, the description, and you'll be able to click on those links to follow Jessica. Yeah. Jessica, again, thank you so much for being here. We have to have you back. I enjoyed talking to you.
I'd love to come back. I enjoyed talking to you. And I also forgot, we have a podcast. It's called Wait a Minute, where we just... we kind of just talk trash about diet culture and about things that we see in the media or in real life. And we try to expose that stuff so that hopefully you don't fall for it and you come hang out with us instead.
I like it. I like it a lot. All right. Hannah's Hive, thank you so much for listening in. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I really did. We cried, we laughed, and we educated. So listen, we're tired. We did a lot today.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. And everyone, until next time, take care.
Bye.
And that's it. I'm out of here.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Hey Hannah podcast. We hope that you found inspiration, insight, and encouragement in our conversation today. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay connected with us, be sure to like, subscribe, and review the Hey Hannah podcast. Your feedback helps us reach more people and spread our message of love and wisdom. You can also follow us on social media at Hey Hannah Podcast. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok to stay updated on all the latest episodes, behind-the-scenes exclusives, and engaging content. And for those of you who prefer the visual experience, catch the video versions of our podcast on our YouTube channel. search Hey Hannah Podcast and hit that subscribe button to never miss an episode. For even more Hey Hannah goodness, visit our website at www.heyhannahpodcast.com. There you'll find updates, bonus content, and join a community that embraces you with open arms. Your continued support truly means the world to us. Together, let's spread love, share wisdom, and honor every precious moment. Because here at Hey Hannah, we believe that life is meant to be lived well. Remember, a new episode of the Hey Hannah Podcast is released every Wednesday, so mark your calendars and be sure to tune in. Thank you again for being a part of Hannah's Hive. Until next time, take care.
Entertainment.